There were no flies, no crows, not even the wind dared move. Only the slow creak of rope tight and sun-dried twisting from a crooked piñon tree in the middle of a godless prairie. She dangled like a forgotten prayer, a young Apache girl. Barefoot and half-dead, her arms limp, her neck stretched, her head tilted sideways as though listening for the sound of mercy that never came. But it was the sign that broke the world. A jagged plank of wood, scorched at the edges, hung from her neck by a splintered rope. Blood had dried across the words but they still cut clean through white man shows no mercy. The letters looked carved by rage, not tools, some strokes deeper than others, some shaky. Like the hand behind them couldn't stop shaking even after it was done. Her black hair veiled half her face. The rest was mottled bruises blooming like cruel flowers across cheek and jaw. Her lips were cracked open, not from speech, just from time, from thirst, from silence. Below, her toes just barely brushed the dust. Not enough to stand, not enough to die. She wasn't swinging. That was the worst part. She'd stopped moving hours ago, or days. Or maybe the desert had simply forgotten how to count time. There were no wagon tracks near the tree. No hoofprints, no footprints, only heat waves rising from the sand like ghosts watching her hang. And the birds, vultures in the sky kept their distance, not because of death, but because something worse than death was here. Something unholy, something human. It was the kind of sight no man should find, but the kind of sin men kept repeating. Dust rose on the horizon like a whisper of reckoning. A horse emerged from it thin, tired, leather-voiced, and atop it, a man too worn to carry shame, too stubborn to turn back the rancher. He pulled the reins, stopped mid-stride. His eyes squinted against the sun. He didn't blink. The horse didn't move. Neither did he, because some things take longer to understand than to see. And this wasn't something a man could look at and keep riding. The camera of the moment slowed. The desert fell quieter still. Somewhere, a dust devil spun and died. The horizon bled orange, but the sun refused to go down, as if it too couldn't look away. And the rancher just sat there in the saddle, stone still, as if waiting for the scene to unwrite itself. It didn't. There was a story here, but nobody left to tell it, except the one hanging. And she wasn't dead yet. Her chest lifted barely, a twitch, a tremble in her fingers, and suddenly the horror sharpened. She was alive, barely. He dismounted. No spurs, no sound, just boots on hot sand, and the slow stretch of leather as he stepped forward. He didn't run, didn't shout, just walked, one slow, deliberate step at a time. As he approached, the shadow of the sign fell over him. White man shows no mercy. He stared at it like it was a mirror, like it saw something inside him he hadn't wanted to know. And maybe it did. Maybe it always had. He didn't touch her, not yet. He walked around the tree, studied the knot, studied her wrists bruised and bound behind her, studied her face. She was no more than 16, maybe 17. But the kind of 17 that had already lived 4 lifetimes of cruelty. On her shoulder, dried blood had formed a stiff patch across her skin. Burn marks, too, symbols branded or beaten in. Unreadable, unforgivable. He took off his hat, let the sweat roll down his forehead. And then, he reached up, his knife unsheathed, carefully, deliberately, so the rope was thick, tied cruel and high. But it wasn't strong enough to carry hate forever. With one slow cut, it snapped. She collapsed into his arms like a bird too broken to flap. A gust of wind finally blew. The sign hit the ground, face up, bleeding red syrup from the corner where her head had hit it so many times. He looked down and said nothing, because what do you say to a truth like that? And yet just before the screen would fade to black, just before the music would rise and the voiceover would promise a tale of healing, her fingers twitched, clutched at his coat. The rancher froze, not from fear, but from understanding she was not asking for rescue. She was asking if this time someone would stay. He could have left her there, and plenty of men had. Judging by the silence around that tree, most had passed by with eyes averted, spines straightened by cowardice, not decency. But he hadn't. And now she lay crumpled in his arms, more spirit than body, more shadow than girl. The rancher Elias knelt in the dust, one hand behind her neck, the other still holding the knife that had cut her down. It trembled, not from fear but from the weight of what it had undone. The sun hammered down, but he didn't move. Instead, he pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Waited. Nothing. Waited again. There a thud, a faint one, like a drum heard from a mile underground, a heartbeat. Her lips cracked as her head tilted slightly. The left eye, swollen and sealed, stayed closed, but the right fluttered open, then shut again. She didn't speak, but her breath rasped once, then stopped. He had no water, not here, no blanket, no salve, no shade, only one choice. He scooped her up gingerly, like she might crack apart from touch, and rose to his feet with a grunt. As he stood, the sign shifted in the sand. "White man shows no mercy." The words glared up at him like an accusation. His jaw clenched. Not because it wasn't true, but because it might have been. He whistled once sharp, low in his horse, old and dust-gray, stepped forward like it had seen this kind of burden before. Elias didn't sling her over the saddle like a sack of meat. He climbed up first, then pulled her into his lap, her weight barely there, her head leaning against his chest. For a moment, they sat like that. 2 strangers, one dying, one unsure which of them was worse off. He shifted the reins, and they rode. The trail home was cruel, and not for its terrain, but for the thoughts it forced him to sit with. The way she didn't flinch when the horse jolted, the way her fingers stayed curled in his coat, even unconscious, the way her breathing slowed not from comfort, but from something deeper, the kind of slowing that made you feel like time was running out. He looked down at her, then ahead, then down again. A strange thing happened. He prayed, not to God. Elias hadn't spoken to him in 15 years, but to something older, the kind of thing that watched from deserts and judged from birds. Let her hold on, just a little longer. By dusk, the cabin appeared a crooked structure of warped pine and loneliness. It sat beside a dried-up creek bed, flanked by 2 old cottonwoods that refused to die. He rode up slow, slid off, held her against him like a child, her limbs limp, her mouth cracked open from heat. He kicked open the door. Inside, the air was stale, dust on every surface. A half-carved sparrow sat abandoned on the table, its beak unfinished. He laid her gently on the cot. The sheets hadn't been used in months, but they were clean. Mostly. She didn't stir. He kneeled, listened, that heartbeat again. Fainter now. He found a tin basin, hauled the pump handle outside, and no water came. He cursed under his breath, then crossed to the rain barrel beside the shed. Rainwater, warm and still. He filled the basin, then hurried back, kneeling beside her again. He dipped a cloth and wiped her forehead soft, circular, like polishing grief. Her skin twitched, not much, but enough. He wiped her lips, let a few drops slide between them. This time she coughed, once. Her eyes opened, both wide, empty, terrified. She jolted, fists weakly swinging. Her mouth tried to scream but produced only a rasp. Elias backed up, hands raised. "It's all right," he said, voice low, gentle. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. She stopped swinging. Silence held between them like a third person in the room. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes tracked his movements like prey. Watches a predator. He moved slow, sat on the ground, several feet away. Let her see his hands. One held the wet cloth, the other, the unfinished sparrow. He picked it up, showed her. Didn't say anything. She blinked. Once, then her gaze drifted away toward the window, toward the dark. That night, he didn't sleep. She did barely. Her chest rose and fell like a question with no answer. Outside, The wind howled through the cottonwoods. Dust scratched against the windows. The sign, now leaned against the porch rail, flapped in the breeze. Elias stared at it. White man shows no mercy. Maybe it was true. Maybe he was proof. But something about her twitching fingers, about how she clung to his coat, maybe that was mercy. Or maybe it was just the last bit of strength in a dying girl. Either way, he hadn't left. He'd gotten down first. Before dawn, she stirs again. Eyes heavy, breath ragged. She looks at the cup of water on the table, then back at Elias. She doesn't speak, just reaches trembling for the wet cloth he left behind. He watches her try to wipe her own face, the rag slipping from her fingers, and for the first time since the hanging tree, he moves not out of duty, but gentleness. He picks up the cloth and kneels beside her again, not to save, but to soothe. He didn't ask her name, not because he didn't care, but because it felt like another wound. A name was a thing given in love or taken in cruelty, and from the way she stared at walls instead of people, Elias figured hers had been taken, so he gave her space, but not distance. The next morning came on slow legs. A pale wash of dawn slipped through the window slats, turning dust into gold. Elias lit the stove in silence, heated water, poured it into a tin basin. Again, this time, he didn't reach for her. He placed the basin beside the cot, the rag folded beside it, and stepped back, watching from a chair in the corner, the unfinished sparrow now resting in his palm like a quiet companion. The girl, barely more than a breath, reached for the cloth. Her hand trembled like it belonged to someone else. She missed the rag, tried again, fingers weak, wrist bruised, shoulder stiff from hanging. She dropped the cloth in the basin. Elias stood, not quickly, though not too alarmed, just stood, stepped forward. She looked at him wide-eyed and still. But this time, she didn't flinch. He knelt beside her, picked up the cloth, unringed it gently, and then lifted it to her face. She let him. The moment was delicate, like trying to wash away a ghost. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips dry, but her eyes, when they flicked up to his, held something fragile. Not trust, not yet, but permission. He cleaned her face in silence, soft, circular strokes, like carving but backward. She blinked at the contact. Tears didn't come, and she'd run out of those days ago. But something shifted in her chest, a loosening. He moved to her arms, unwrapped the crude bindings at her wrists. The rope burns were raw, deep, blackened in places. He took a bowl of salve from the shelf, cedar pitch and bear grease, made long ago, mostly for cracked knuckles and saddle sores. Dabbed it on her skin with fingers steadier than expected. She hissed once, but didn't pull away. That was progress. Outside, the desert began to wake. A hawk screamed in the canyon. Wind stirred the dry grass. Inside, the cabin breathed differently. Not like a home yet, but no longer just a place where someone came to die. Hours passed in fragments. Elias kept busy boiling water, mending the stovepipe, cutting firewood, but his eyes returned to her often. Each time she was still watching the door, not to flee, just to know whether death might return. That evening she tried to sit up, failed, but tried again. Elias approached with caution, placed a pillow behind her back, slipped an old wool shawl around her shoulders. She gripped it tight, as if remembering what warmth felt like. Then her voice came hoarse, cracked, barely there. One word, sky. He froze. She repeated it. Sky. He nodded once. It wasn't a name, it was her name. And it sounded like survival. Elias went to the shelf, pulled down an old coffee tin. Inside, among rusted nails and spent cartridges, was a tiny carving knife, the one he hadn't used in years. He walked back to the table, sat beside the half-finished sparrow, the same one Sky had noticed the day before. She watched as he picked it up, turned it in his hand, then began carving again. Not speaking, not rushing, just smoothing the beak, then the wing, Sky shifted on the cot, eyes narrowing, not in suspicion, in recognition. She raised a hand, pointed. Elias followed her gaze to the wall beside the window. There, faintly, drawn in ash and old paint, were two wings, incomplete, lopsided, childlike. He hadn't noticed them before. Sky looked at them, then at the bird in his hand, then whispered. One wing was always broken. Elias said nothing, but his fingers stopped carving. Just for a moment, then began again. That night, as the fire cracked and Sky drifted into a sleep not haunted by ropes, Elias placed the sparrow beside her pillow, not done, but close, and in that quiet cabin where silence used to scream, the bird watched over them both. In the morning, Sky wakes and sees the sparrow beside her. She touches it softly, then turns to the window. Outside, a real bird chirps weak, unsure. She tilts her head, listening, then looks toward the wall again, toward the incomplete wings. As Elias enters with a cup of broth, she points to the wall. Her finger trembles slightly, but this time it's not from pain, it's from memory. Crawling its way back through ash. It started with a brushstroke. Sky dipped her fingers into the tin of soot and water Elias had left beside the hearth. No words, just movement. She stood on shaking legs, leaned against the wall for balance, and began to paint. One slow arc, then another. Two black wings. Open wide but incomplete. Again, Elias stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching in silence. He'd seen murals before on canyon walls, under bridges, on the belly of old wagons, but this wasn't art. It was exorcism. The image took shape, wings splayed, feathers sketched like wounds, the center empty, no bird, no body, just space. Sky stepped back. Her breathing labored, ash on her fingertips, sweat at her temple. She looked at Elias, as if daring him to ask. He didn't. She nodded, then sat down on the floor, knees to her chest, staring at the wings like they were trying to tell her something she already knew. Later, as dusk fell through the window, Elias lit a lantern. Its soft glow touched the mural, turned the wings to shadows. He sat across from her at the table, the carved sparrow between them. She traced its beak with her thumb, paused at the broken chip near its tail. "Do you know," she said quietly, "what they did before they tied me up?" Elias didn't answer, but he leaned in, elbows on the table, listening. "They made me watch," she said. "3 of them. One laughed. The other prayed while he carved the sign. The third held the rope." She looked up. Her eyes weren't wet. They were dry, dangerously dry. "They didn't kill me because I fought back." She opened her hand. Inside it was a thin scar, jagged, white, a knife wound, poorly healed. Elias stared at it. "They said leaving me half alive would send a better message." Her jaw trembled. "White man shows no mercy," she whispered. "They meant you. All of you." She looked away, then added, quieter still, "I believed them." Elias swallowed hard. His hands clenched beneath the table. Not in defense, not even in guilt, but because there was no answer that would make her wrong. He'd never hung a girl from a tree and never carved a sign, but he'd looked away before. Everyone had, until now. He stood slowly, picked up the sparrow. "Not all white men." He started. Sky's eyes flared. He stopped, corrected himself. No man should do that. He placed the sparrow back down, but too many do. And with that, he sat back down. Sky's gaze softened, just slightly. She lifted the sparrow, held it in both hands like something sacred. "I used to feed them," she said. "Birds." Her voice drifted like smoke. "My mother said if you feed the small thing, the big ones can't find you." She looked at the wall mural again, but the small thing stopped coming. Outside, wind rustled the cottonwoods. Leaves skittered against the cabin like whispers. Inside, Sky reached across the table just a few inches and set the sparrow between them, facing Elias. "She died in winter," she said. My mother. Elias tilted his head. Snow came fast. We were hiding in the caves near Black Ridge. She wrapped me in her coat, then went looking for help. Sky paused. She never came back. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Not cold, not distant, just weighty. Like truth settling into bones, Elias rose, took a blanket from the chair, draped it around Sky's shoulders. She didn't flinch this time. Instead, she leaned into it. And into him. Just a little. They sat like that until the fire burned low. Two survivors, not friends, not family, but something fragile in between. That night, as the lantern dimmed, Sky added something to the wings on the wall. Just a small mark. A feather, drawn near the base. Different from the rest. Lighter, not as angry. Elias noticed it in the morning. Didn't say a word. Just poured her a cup of tea and placed the sparrow beside her again. Sky fingers the sparrow as Elias steps outside to split wood. Through the open door. She sees him pause just for a moment, his hand resting on the axe, his back turned. She watches how long he stands like that before finally lifting the blade. Her grip tightens on the sparrow, then loosens. That night, without speaking, she sits next to him on the porch, shoulder brushing his. They don't look at each other, but they don't look away either. They sat in silence most nights now. The porch creaked beneath their weight, two souls balanced carefully on wood worn smooth by storms, ghosts, and time. Elias would sip from his tin cup. Sky would sit beside him, holding the sparrow in her lap, tracing its wings like she was trying to give it new ones. They never spoke of love, but it bloomed anyway, in glances, in the way he moved slower when she entered the room, in the way she left the door open when he stepped out, trusting he'd come back. Some days, she'd work in the garden, what was left of it, weeds mostly, a few stubborn onions still clawing through the dust. He offered her gloves once. She shook her head. Let the dirt get under her fingernails. I want it to stay, she said. So it can't be taken. Elias didn't understand what it meant, but he knew enough not to ask. She taught him a word in Apache. Chiki. It meant shelter. He carved it into the underside of the porch railing one evening while she watched from the steps. Didn't ask her permission, didn't need to. On the sixth evening, after a supper of dry beans and silence, she picked up the sparrow, turned it over, and began scratching a pattern into the base with the tip of a nail. What are you doing? Elias asked. She looked up. Giving it a story, she said. He didn't reply, just nodded and handed her the carving knife. But peace-like sparrows never stayed long in the West. The morning the posse arrived, there were no warning shots, just dust, hoofbeats, and a voice. Rancher, we know what you're hiding. Elias stepped out onto the porch. 3 men, broad hats, spit-polished boots, their rifles slung casual, like judgment handed down by hand. The one in front had a scar that crossed both lips, made his smile look like a knife wound. He nodded toward the cabin. She in there? Elias didn't answer. Didn't have to. The man's eyes narrowed. She's supposed to be dead. That sign was a promise. Elias didn't move. From the shadows inside, Sky heard every word. Her fingers wrapped tight around the sparrow, so tight the carving chipped again. But she didn't cry, didn't hide. She stood, walked to the door, and opened it. The porch went still. The 3 men shifted in their saddles, surprised, offended, as if the sight of her alive broke some sacred rule. Sky stepped beside Elias, didn't touch him, didn't need to, just stood there, barefoot, her chin high. The leader leaned forward in his saddle. Girl, he said, we left you for the crows. This ain't your land no more. Sky looked him in the eye, then held up the broken sparrow. Her voice didn't shake. You don't get to decide what flies. The second man, nervous hands, twitchy, gripped his reins. The third, silent so far, just watched Elias. Why her? He finally asked. You got nothing left, old man. Why risk it for her? Elias stepped forward, and only one step. But it changed everything. She's not mine, he said. Not my kin, not my cause. He looked at them all, But she's here, and I'm here. And that's enough, the leader snorted. White man shows no mercy, he said mockingly. Elias didn't flinch. Then maybe I ain't that kind of white man. They rode off for now, but the message was clear they'd be back, with more than words. That night, Sky sat at the table, carving the sparrow again, her hands steadier, the wings sharper now. Elias watched her. I ain't no hero, he said quietly. Sky didn't look up. I know. She paused, then added, but you didn't ask me to run. He smiled sadly. You didn't try to. Outside, the wind began to howl, but inside, the sparrow took shape, still broken, but not afraid. Sky sets the sparrow on the table, now carved with bold new wings, unfinished but rising. She glances at Elias. He nods once, then turns to the rifle leaning by the door. Slowly, deliberately, he picks it up. Sky doesn't speak. She walks to the wall, dips her fingers in the soot water again, and adds one last brushstroke to the bird mural. A second wing larger, open wide, outside. A horse neighs in the wind. The storm is coming. The desert doesn't forget. Neither do men who bleed power like perfume. By morning, the wind carried more than dust. It carried judgment. Elias stood on the porch, loading shells into his old Winchester. Sky watched from the doorway. Her arms crossed over her chest, not afraid, just resigned. There were no plans, no speeches, just glances. And the sound of metal clicking into place. Around noon, the first buzzard passed overhead, a dark blot against the sun. It circled once, then again drawn to old habits, old cruelties. Sky looked up, then down at the sparrow in her hands. The carved bird had changed. She chipped away the cracked wing, smoothed it, added curves. It still wasn't perfect, but it was no longer broken. She ran a thumb across its back, whispered something in Apache, then set it on the porch rail, facing the tree. By mid-afternoon, they came. 6 riders this time, dust rising behind them like a curtain of smoke. They rode hard, proud, armed, and at their center Scarmouth, still grinning that crooked wound of a smile. He didn't dismount, didn't need to. The others flanked him, rifles drawn, eyes scanning the homestead like it was already theirs. Elias stepped forward, Sky beside him. Scarmouth pointed to the tree. We brought you a reminder, he said. From one saddle, a man held up another sign. Fresh wood, fresh paint. White man never forgets. The words bled red at the corner's paint. Maybe, maybe not. Scarmouth tossed it on the ground. Last warning, he said. Hand her over, Dum, or the rope comes back out. Elias didn't speak. Instead, he stepped down from the porch, one hand on his rifle. Not raised, not yet, just there. Sky stayed on the steps. She didn't run, didn't hide. She held the sparrow in both hands like it was a shield. Then came the preacher. From behind the riders, a man stepped forward, older. His robe scorched, cross burned into his palm. He raised his hand not to bless, but to threaten. The girl is cursed, he said. Brings division, war. Sky looked at him, long and cold. Your God watched me hang, she said. Her voice didn't tremble. And he said nothing. Scarmouth sneered. She speaks now, but she'll scream later. He drew his revolver. So did Elias. So did 2 others. No time for negotiations, no place for reason. Just dry wind, angry hearts, and 6 men who rode for blood. The first shot came from the preacher, but it never landed. Because Sky moved first. She threw the sparrow. It struck the preacher's chest, surprising him. In that blink, Elias fired. The preacher fell. Then chaos. Gunfire cracked the silence. Wood splintered. Dirt kicked up. Horses reared. Sky dove from the steps, rolled behind the well. Elias ducked low, firing with precision that didn't come from righteousness, just survival. He hit one rider, then another. Sky scrambled for the fallen sparrow. Found it. Clutched it like a lifeline. Scarmouth dismounted, screaming curses, firing wildly toward the cabin. A bullet clipped the doorframe. Another grazed Elias's shoulder, but he stayed standing. Because she was watching. Because she needed him to. Sky rose from behind the well, hands shaking, blood at her temple from a splintered board. Scarmouth saw her. Grinned. "You want to die again, girl?" He stepped toward her. Didn't see Elias flanking from the left. Didn't see the end coming. Until it came. The rifle shot was clean. Scarmouth fell to his knees. Then forward, face first in the dust. Right beside the sign. "White man never forgets." Blood seeped across the letters. Turned the message into something else. Something no longer legible. No longer feared. The rest scattered. The preacher dead. Scarmouth dead. The desert silent again. But not from fear. From peace. Hard-earned. Barely believable. Elias dropped the rifle. Sky stood in the center of the yard, holding the sparrow. One wing cracked, the other still intact. Her fingers closed around it, and didn't let go. As the sun sets, Elias kneels beside the fallen sign. He runs a finger through the blood-soaked words, smearing them until they vanish. Sky walks up beside him. Quiet. Steady. She hands him the sparrow. He looks at it, then at her. In her eyes, he sees something that wasn't there before. Not forgiveness. Not forgetfulness. But flight. Together, they walk toward the cabin. Behind them. The wind finally moves through the trees and carries the broken sign away. It rained that night. Not a storm, just a soft, steady drizzle. Enough to darken the porch boards, enough to carry dust back into the ground. Inside, the cabin glowed with firelight. Sky sat by the window, bare feet tucked beneath her. The carved sparrow cradled in her hands like a newborn. She hadn't spoken since the standoff. Not because she was afraid, because she was listening. To silence, to safety, to the strange stillness that comes after men ride off and don't return. Elias moved around her quietly, setting a pot on the stove, folding the torn corner of the rug back in place. Old habits, nervous ones. He glanced at her. Her head was tilted, eyes on the window, not lost, anchored. "I never thought I'd see rain here again," he said. She didn't answer, but her lips curled barely. A corner smile, like she'd remembered how, when morning came, the prairie shimmered, rainwater pooled in the dry creek bed. The air smelled like sage and smoke. Sky stepped out onto the porch, the same porch she once watched from, shoulders hunched, heart armored. Now she stood straight. The sparrow rested in her palm. Finished, one wing scarred, the other strong. She walked to the front wall of the cabin where her mural waited. The wings she'd painted had faded with weather, cracked with time. She dipped her fingers in the leftover soot water, stepped closer, and painted the body. Simple, bold, centered. The sparrow now had form, shape, flight. Elias stepped out beside her, watched in silence, then handed her something wrapped in cloth. She opened it. Inside the carving knife. Worn, sharpened, clean. "You'll need it," he said. She met his eyes. "You're leaving?" "No," he said. "You are." She stared. "You don't owe me anything," he added. "But you deserve to see the rest of the sky." They stood in silence. Then, after a long beat, she handed him the sparrow. "I carved it with both hands," she said. He took it, turned it over. On the underside, words scratched into the wood to the man who stayed. He swallowed, but said nothing. That evening, she packed a small satchel. Nothing much, just food, the carving knife, a blanket. Elias saddled the old gray horse. She mounted slow, calm. Before riding off, she looked back at the cabin, at him, then at the wall, where the sparrow now spread full wings in soot and rain. A real bird landed on the porch rail, a sparrow, small, quiet, alive. Sky watched it, smiled, then turned her horse westward, and rode. Elias stood alone, the sparrow in his hand, the carving, the symbol. It had begun as broken, But now it meant something else. It meant mercy. Not the kind you beg for, the kind you give without asking. As the dust settled, the sign that once read, "White man shows no mercy," lay buried beneath the porch, forgotten. And from the cabin wall, a new message stretched across the air in wings. You don't need to be forgiven to be free. In a world where silence often speaks louder than cruelty, sometimes the smallest act of defiance is simply staying when others leave, listening when others judge, holding space for someone's pain without trying to fix it. This story reminds us that mercy isn't grand. It's not banners and sermons. It's quiet meals. It's standing beside someone when the world tells you not to. It's helping someone heal without demanding their gratitude. The broken sparrow reminds us that we are all scarred in ways others can't see. And yet we still have wings, still have the chance to take flight, no matter how late the hour, no matter how long the rope once held us. And maybe the greatest salvation isn't being saved at all. Maybe it's being seen. So if you find yourself in the presence of someone broken, don't ask for their name. Don't demand their stories, just stay. Long enough for the wind to move again. Long enough for silence to feel safe. Long enough for the sparrow to fly. Because sometimes, salvation in the Wild West isn't a bullet or a prayer, it's a porch. And someone who didn't ride away